Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park. During the winter of 2001 to 2002, my family and I were the camp hosts at the park and lived in the park full time. One evening in mid-December of 2001, I and my two children, ages 11 and 10, were in our travel trailer reading when we heard a sound that made us cower. It was something between a human cat call and a cow mooing, a kind of "ah-oo" that just echoed through the woods. I have served as a naturalist for the California State Park system. I have hiked the woods of California all my life, and I have never heard anything like this before. I have heard bear, mountain lion, and elk, and this was nothing like those. What impressed us was most is how loud it was. We have heard groups of humans in the campground whooping and hollering, and their noise level was not even close to this. We were inside of a travel trailer that had windows closed up, and the noise was clear and strong. We estimated that it had to have come just across the Smith River from the campground. I decided to make this report after hearing what seemed to be the same kind of sound on a recent rerun of sightings. New to the area in July 2005, I had been traveling from Crescent City, California, over the pass of Highway 199 weekly to Grants Pass, Oregon, and back, and now in the winter of 2006, it was 2 times weekly. My wife had not joined me, and we were separated, and I was attending counseling classes in Medford, Oregon. We had about 5 children, and I had my son living with me, and he was back at home. He was about 13. This particular night, I was delayed on my return from Medford in the evening, usually arriving back in Crescent City around 12:15 a.m. It was roughly an hour from the tunnel to arrive in either Crescent City or Brookings, Oregon, where I live now. I had stopped at the bug station and rested, because I was delayed in my return, sitting with the heater on and the engine idling and doors locked. The little phone booth shack for inspections there now was not there yet. After closing my eyes about 40 minutes, I'm guessing like 12:25 a.m., I was rested and awake to get going back to Crescent City. I use my high beams because it is so dark through there, and everybody does it because, like signaling any opposite traffic of your whereabouts, everyone is usually polite to lower them upon the distance cruising. I left the tunnel and traveled down the hill and began the series of S-turns through the pass. It's like a canyon and runs adjacent to various sections of the Smith River. I was slowing through the second S-turn and was watching my headlights and the shadows of the roadside barriers as they were casting the shadows in the trees along the river. My truck was an older Chevy dually with a small diesel, and it was not a powerhouse like the newer ones. I was just cruising with the turns and taking my time. It had a shell with an 8-foot bed, and it was used by a retired couple to tow their trailer, so it was kind of slow. The lights are low to the ground, and when the high beams are on, they go out further and up higher. You can be seen by anyone else, and they can see you from a ways off. As I rounded the turn and was approaching the end of the turn while watching my high beam shadows of the barricade up in the trees, I noticed this big, dark shadow cast in the trees from my lights as I rolled along and my lights lit up a giant creature walking along the opposite side, going against traffic, facing away from me. I said to myself, "Oh shit," and was very excited. The next part of the turn was coming up right away, and I immediately thought to turn around to see its face. I knew it was a Bigfoot and wanted to see its face, but I was too close still to maneuver around and go the other way, and the turn was too shallow. 1,000 things went through my mind. What does he look like? Don't turn around yet. What if he's hostile? He'll beat up my truck. Don't turn around here. The logging trucks fly through there, and my slow diesel would have to do a 3-point turn around or more to possibly get T-boned. I was excited, but also a bit scared. This is amazing. I kept telling myself, not yet. Don't turn around here. I kept looking for spots along the road to turn around, even a little room, because I really wanted to see its face. The mix of it being late, a tight turning canyon, being afraid and also excited, I was bewildered a little. What do I do? Almost immediately, it was now the small fast S-turns, very narrow, that lead to the narrow passage. It is an extremely tight through there, and you could see the tree hanging off the cliff above the roadway in the daytime, and this leads to the resort at Patrick's Creek Lodge. As I passed, I was still shaken up and thought what to do. No one will believe me. As I passed Little Jones Creek, I decided to forget about turning around because, 1, I had already seen it, and 2, it was late, and no one would believe me anyhow. I did not have a regular cell phone. It was a cheap Android knockoff due to no reception. A real long startup time when turned on. So here is what I saw and why I am documenting it. It was well over 8 feet tall. I am 6'2" and played basketball since 4th grade. Even against 7-foot players in high school, I was a leaper and can jump really high. I was 6 foot when I was 12, stopping my growth at 15 years old at 6'2". I could not accurately guess the weight, but well over 400 to 500 pounds, possibly 600, 700, or even 800. He had no neck, with a pointed type head buried between his massive shoulders. I'm talking huge shoulders. I was going slow enough through the turn to see his fingers, toes and palms, and foot bottoms as he walked, but his hair was like a llama, matted looking, but long and longer, and shorter on different parts of his body. He was light gray to smoky charcoal green, with some black deeper and beneath his hair, closer to his body. The hair was long on his calves, forearms, hands, and feet, so I just saw tips of long fingers. His feet bottoms were flipping tough. I'll spell it Tuff, because they were wide and what I would describe as padded. He walked swinging his arms down near his knees, but above them and upright, not hunched over like an ape. He was walking, but just massive. Those shoulders. I saw him for a good 3 to 4 seconds. His torso was longer in proportion to his legs. His leg length of thigh to calves was not as long as his upper body. He was huge. I went to work the next day and told a coworker who had lived up here for over 20 years and an avid hunter and fisherman. And he is also part Cherokee, so I knew I could trust him. He has spent countless hours elk hunting and bear hunting. He looked at me kind of silly and slept it up, so I shut up. You've only been up here about 8 months and you've already seen a Bigfoot? I know what I saw. After learning more and now hearing them, and hearing the term Gigantopithecus, I looked it up and the tropical is the one I saw. Turn the animal around and that is exactly what was walking down the roadway. Well, this was just supposed to be a fishing trip to see what the area had to offer. I had been coming to this area for the past couple of months and started to learn it a little bit better. So, I decided to go exploring for some fishing holes. All I had with me at the time was a fishing rod and a GPS receiver so I wouldn't get lost. I parked the truck and started out on foot. I had talked to 2 local fishermen about what was in these rivers and what to use. I'm from the south, and this area was like a new world to me. So I made my way down to the river along the side of the bank. At times, the going got a little hard, but I managed. I tried several places, but the water was moving too fast. So I thought I would try and find a slack part of the river, where the flow was just a little slower. Now, these woods are a lot different than the ones I was used to, so I was a little excited about this new area. I had been walking for maybe 45 minutes and covered maybe 2 miles when I saw something off in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a stump, seeing that I had left my glasses in the truck. Now, my vision isn't that bad, but I still need them for driving. But I started to feel a little uneasy due to an earlier encounter. Plus, it might have been a bear. But, being the idiot that I am, I had to get closer. I got to within about 75 yards because I was using the tree line as cover. That was as close as I wanted to get. You could say that my heart was beating out of my chest. It was like I had buck fever. Well, now that I was within good sight of the creature, it was easy to see what it was. It finally stood up, and I didn't know up until that point how big it really was. Now, I had a roommate who was 6'7", and this creature would have easily stood over him. At the best guess, I would have to say that it was 7 feet and 6 inches tall, and it had to weigh well over 400 pounds. It finally turned to me and made me out in a second, but when it turned, it didn't run away instantly. It just stood there. I guess it was trying to see what I was. We must have looked at each other for 10 seconds or so, but it felt like 10 minutes. And in that time, all I could see was the creature had dark reddish-brown hair, and the arms easily hung down to the creature's knees. But within an instant, something spooked it. The creature turned and looked down the river, and it just took off. Now the ground that this thing covered was amazing. I didn't move for a good bit because I was in shock. After the creature had left, I did the same, once I could get my feet working again. Well, it has been a couple of years since it happened, but here goes. I was stationed in California, and I would always drive around looking for the next great fishing hole. I had been driving for quite some time and had decided to pull into Humboldt Redwoods State Park. Being from Alabama, I figured seeing these big redwoods would be kind of cool. So I got off of Highway 101 and took the Avenue of the Giants exit. Driving down the road, I was amazed at the size of the trees, so they kind of grabbed my attention. I started seeing a lot of places where I was thinking I could fish, so I started to slow down even more to find a place to park. As I kept driving, the river kind of started getting a little farther away, and I was about to turn around, when out of nowhere, something walked across the road, and to say the least, it shocked the you-know-what out of me. The reason why it got me a little jumpy was because of the fact that I had to have come within a couple of feet of this thing. Now, I'm a pretty big guy, 6 feet and about 220 pounds, but whatever walked in front of my truck had to have been 7 feet tall, due to the height of my truck, which is a Chevy Z71. Now, when it comes to the poundage of this thing, I would have to say it was well over 350. As far as physical features, all I saw was the back and arm swing. The thing never turned around for me to get a better look at it. But it had a large back and rather long arms. As far as the neck goes, it didn't really have one. The animal's traps made it look like it didn't have a neck, kinda like me. But after I did find a place to turn around, I went back to look around. Dumb, I know, to say the least. I only found a couple of tracks. They had to have been 14 to 15 inches long, plus the stride of this thing was a lot longer than mine. Just to make the stride this thing did, I had to make one heck of an effort. Now all I can say is whatever I saw that day was nothing like anything I'd ever seen in the woods, and I grew up in the outdoors. During the weekend of May 26th and 27th, I was conducting a sound survey project with 3 other people near the town of Johnson and the Klamath River. This area we were in had a sighting last year, around the month of July. The place where we decided to set up was a recent clear cut that ran along the hillside. It was about 1,000 feet wide and 1,200 feet long. Then the edges were fir and oak trees that developed a thick cover. Running the width and centered in the clear cut was a dirt road that the local people and loggers used on a daily basis. It also provided us with a place to park and set up our sound equipment. It also became base for our team. From our base, looking down into the valley, about 2 miles, we could see the town of Johnson. From our point, we were about 1,500 feet above the river and town. Just prior to dusk, I had 2 members climb to the top of the clear cut, about 150 feet in elevation, and about 300 feet away from the base. I did this so if anything was to come closer to our base camp, they would have the best field of vision, and with their night vision device would be able to determine what it was. We also had two-way portable radios for the upper lookout and base. Manny and myself continued to set up the equipment and waited until nightfall. Because I was scheduled to participate at 10 p.m. in a live broadcast with Jeff Rent's sightings program, I was ensuring that my bag's cell phone was working properly. All the equipment checked out other than the phone worked but had some static in the line. At 9:40, we started the broadcast. The sound traveled very well and seemed to echo forever. The location we were at easily helped the sound to travel well over 5 miles from valley to ridgetop and saddle. It covered a very large area. Very happy with the sound, we continued to broadcast a few more times before the sightings show started. It was almost 10 p.m. when the phone rang. It was the sightings show. The show went fine for the first few minutes, but the static was getting horrendous, cutting Jeff off completely at times. About 10 minutes into the show, Jeff asked me to try and find another location where the reception might be a little better. A commercial was playing at the time, so I quickly contacted the upper team and Manny and told them that I had to move. I started my vehicle and drove about 600 feet towards the tree line. I reconnected to the show and was relieved that it was a better connection. I was in this new location less than 15 feet to the tree line, with visibility not over 5 feet into the trees. I was parked for a few minutes and heard what I thought was a bear charging me. I am in a convertible with the window down, not much protection in anyone's mind. I looked for my revolver and it was gone. I must have forgot it with me when I was in a hurry to get into a better location. I sat there for a second, and again I heard this charging that sounded like a few feet away from me. This time, I started my car and got on the radio and told the upper team that I was moving out because of something charging me in the bush. Manny didn't have a radio, as we were together at base camp and had to share two, one for base and one for the upper team. I asked the upper team, "Do you see anything?" And they replied, "No." I decided to wait it out, as this thing could expose itself to me, although I just realized that my camera was also with Manny. The show continued on, and I would hear footfalls, breaking branches, and at least one grunt growl. I kept asking the upper team if they could see anything, and they kept saying no. I at least had a flashlight, but didn't want to use it in fear that I would scare off whatever it was. Obviously, I was becoming very concerned for my safety, not knowing what it was, but I remained there on a chance I might be able to see a Bigfoot, or at least see something. I heard the charging again and again, and finally a crackle in the radio. "John, it's looking right at you. Can't you see it? It's about 25 feet away. That bastard is huge." My heart started pounding fast, and trying to carry on with this live program without sounding distracted was even harder. The other upper team member confirmed what they were looking at. It was something that was at least 8 feet tall, with shoulders that were 4 feet across. As I sat in my car, cell phone to one ear and the other to the forest, I could hear it charge again, and that's when they would say it went back into the trees. This happened several times. This sighting went on for several minutes, with the squatch looking at me by moving its body from side to side, trying to get a better look through the trees and brush. It was also observing, moving its arms in a quick motion, as if signaling to others. This whole incident from first charge heard to the last tree branch breaking lasted about 30 minutes. It was by far one of the most intense moments in my life. That next day, we did search the area and found the soil disturbed where the squatch was spotted. Due to the soil condition, it did not allow any prints to be left. Judging from a tree and stump in the area, it was determined that it was at least 8 feet tall, but closer to 9 feet. From the squatch's point of view, it had several windows to look at me, and by moving its body from side to side, it would have a clear view of my entire vehicle and me. At approximately 9:30 p.m., we were in the process of setting up our second tent. There were 6 of us in the party, and maintaining the campfire when, from directly across the road and meadow, we heard a type of whistle, or double whoop sound. Try whistling the syllables whew, whew, was immediately followed by a very intense screech, which I can only compare to a bear cub in danger, combined with the intensity of a hawk shriek. One of our younger members, who's 15, insists that it sounded like a possessed woman. Now, I grew up in the mountains of Montana, and am familiar with many animals and their sounds, and have never heard anything like this in my life. And until this moment, I have wondered what it was like to have the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I have never felt this kind of reaction. I repeat, never. The sound sequence repeated itself again, followed by a third lone screech. Immediately, we panned the forestry line with our flashlights, with the intent of at least seeing the reaction of an animal's eyes. Nothing. We must have lighted the area for nearly 10 minutes, followed the sound, and still saw nothing. As time wore on, we began to relax and go about our business of finishing the tent setup and dinner. Then, at about 12:30 a.m., just past midnight, with two of the teenagers already asleep, we again heard the whistle whoop, immediately followed by the screech, but this time directly behind our campsite, up the slope near the picnic areas amongst the trees. Again, we panned the area with lights. I broke out the 2 million candle power gangbuster spotlight, and it lit the night. And still nothing. No movement, no eyes, nothing. After panning around the entire area once again, I noticed movement on the road towards the restrooms, and we quickly moved the light in that direction. Walking across the road was a tiny little gray fox, or kit fox. Well, for our needs, that was a mystery animal, we thought. We figured it yelped, and then made that nasty screech for some other reason. Funny, but that was enough confirmation for us, and we went to bed for the night. At approximately 5:30 a.m., 3 of us woke up at the same time, and after a minute or two of silence, we heard the whistle whoop, followed immediately by the intense screech, and this followed again by a lone screech. But this time, the sound was only about 20 feet from our tent, as if it was standing directly on the paved road next to our campsite. We were all unnerved somewhat, but agreed it's just that darn fox again, and didn't bother to jump up out of the video cameras or spotlights. I exchanged words with a person in the other tent, not sure if this chased it away, but we then heard the same whistle and screech again, but far off in the distance, as if it were a quarter-mile away. This was the end of our encounter. The following morning, we checked the area for any signs of tracks and found nothing. We also nearly walked the entire circumference of the lake shore, searching for signs of any kind of anything, and got nothing. We were on a long vacation from Missouri in Crescent City, California, staying at the KOA campground. This was our second night at this campground. We were camped at Site 401, way back in the isolated section of the campground, far from anyone. I had just finished cooking our supper on the portable propane barbecue pit, which was located on the picnic table. We both went inside to eat. During the time I was cooking, I set up a campfire, but didn't light it yet. After we finished eating, I started the campfire. After the fire was burning for about 15 minutes, I kicked it into the fire pit from the grate. At the time, my wife got a very strong feeling that we were being watched from behind our camper. She said it seemed to move from behind the trailer, from one end to the other. There were trees and dense foliage behind the trailer. I started to look around with a flashlight to see what it was, and after not finding anything, I started the car and plugged in the 12-voltage spotlight. Looking around for about 5 minutes, I thought I saw something move in the distance, behind a tree. This is in the opposite area from the trailer, where no one was camped at all. We were both shaken up, and went inside the trailer for the night. After 10 minutes, my wife heard 2 whoops, coming from an area that I thought I saw something move at. She was in bed lying next to the window. I didn't hear a sound. One more thing to add is that the night before we heard the dogs bark in the distance, this night it was all quiet and no dogs at all. The closest camper was about 100 feet away towards the main office. There was no smell. a fishing season on the lower Klamath River in 2001. It was the end of summer, and the river was extremely low, and I just finished cleaning my salmon. It was about 10 o'clock at night, and I drove up to the river, Blake River's bar. This is where the road ends. We were sitting in my truck with the windows down when we heard a sound that I'd never heard on the river, or anywhere for that matter. My attention was immediately taken so we could hear an extremely deep howling sound that sounded something like a whoa. I was a little freaked out because I had never heard of anything like this. I remember trying to put a body with the sound and not coming up with anything. My friend and I looked at each other and said, "What the hell is that?" The hair was raised on the back of my neck, and I felt very fearful, even though I knew the thing was across the river. We waited and didn't say anything, and within about 3 seconds, we heard the same sound again. This time it went whoa, 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 3 times. It was a very deep, almost like a moaning sound. Immediately after the sound stopped, I heard the same noise, except this one sounded like it was coming up around the corner, about a half mile, and on the other side of what is called a turret flat. This one sounded more faint, because it was coming up from the other side of a densely wooded area where the river bends. It seemed clear to us that they were calling back and forth to one another. The one on the top of the river called back only twice, and the one across the river sounded off about 4 times. This entire thing only took about 20 seconds, and then it was done. I couldn't really explain what I was thinking or feeling after they stopped, but I was very shaken and just sat there for about 30 seconds, waiting to see if there was going to be any more sounds. I turned my lights on after I thought it was over, and couldn't see anything because the fog was too dense. We were both sure there had never heard any animal like this before. Between the two of us having about 60 years of night fishing and hunting in this area, this was a first. We both talked about it and felt whatever it was that they could have come from either side of the river, because the river was so low that it would have been easy to wade across there, and there wasn't little traffic in the area. The river was also very warm, and it was also full of 30 to 50 pound salmon that were heading up the river. It was a great time to fish, if that is what they were doing. Last Sunday, November 16th, 2003, my friend, my dog, and I traveled from Portland, Oregon to Northern California for some late-season backpacking. We stopped at the Aikens Creek campground, west of Orleans, California, and just west of Bluff Creek on Highway 96, at approximately 6 p.m., as it was too late to hike anywhere that evening, and the Six Rivers NF website listed it as one of the campgrounds open through November. As we neared the big pay station, a sign deferred us to a render payment directly to the campground host, and as we approached the host site, it became clear that the site was vacant with just a few small items left behind. So, we took the liberty to drive in and explore the portion of the campground that was open. Driving near the southern edge, nearest to the Klamath River, we smelled a pervasive, skunky odor, but thought nothing of it at the time. Eventually, we pulled into a campsite, which was the second or maybe third from the entrance at the foot of a large hill. Our intent was to get out of the pickup, leaving the dog inside, get on our rain gear, and set up the tent as quickly as possible, as it was already quite dark and raining. Just after donning my rain gear, however, I heard some distinct hoots from within the woodline, which were decidedly not owl-like, nor human-like, but could be most accurately likened to those of an ape. I asked my friend if he had heard that, but he had not, as he had 2 hoods pulled up over his head. I quickly scanned the woodline with my headlamp, seeing nothing out of the ordinary through the dark and rain. We began setting up the tent when I heard it again. "There," I said. "Did you hear it that time?" "No," he responded, but he did pull his hoods down. Shortly thereafter, we both heard another set of hoots. "What do you think that is?" he asked. I have had casual interest in the Sasquatch phenomenon since childhood, and find its existence to be scientifically plausible. I am also quite comfortable in the wilderness, having spent much of my life in the outdoors from Alaska to Costa Rica professionally, academically, and recreationally. But I never honestly expected to experience anything firsthand with such a creature. So, being educated and reasonable, I declined to respond. As we continued, we began hearing other noises. First, we heard whacking sounds of wood against wood, more probably stick against tree. Perceiving this hooting and whacking as a less than friendly display, we became a little nervous and contemplated leaving. But curiosity and the dread of packing up, moving to an unplanned location, and reconstructing in the dark, while already soaked, compelled us to stay. So, we continued constructing the tent between periodic scans of the area. The whacking continued, and we noticed it would come from different locations in short sequences, too short for one individual to move from point A to point B. Again, my friend asked, "What do you think it is?" I gave the guarded response. "I'll tell you what, I've spent a lot of time in the woods and observed a lot of animals, but I've never heard anything like this." I assume he read through the evasion to the meaning of my response, given the ubiquitous usage of the word Bigfoot, and images thereof, in the surrounding communities and some casual conversation we had on the subject during our drive. Shortly before turning in for the evening, I heard a short series of what sounded like heavy footsteps on the rocky terrain of the hillside, in the rhythm of a two-legged walk. Turn in we did, however, with senses peaked and dogs tucked securely within the tent. We slept intermittently and restlessly, hearing sounds throughout the night. Most frequently we heard the whacking. Most regularly, a rather hollow-sounding report originating from a point some distance to our northeast and up a hill. We would, however, periodically hear closer and clearer whacks from varying locations to our general southeast, once hearing a disturbingly close and firm whack from our southwest. I awoke once at approximately 3 a.m. and heard a distinct single-note whistle from the general direction of the distant hollow whacking, which were, again, decidedly unbirdlike, yet not quite human. Soon thereafter, we were all startled upright by a crack, followed by a loud rock slide, terminating distressingly close to our location. My friend informed me he had heard 2 other smaller slides earlier that night. After all was quiet for some time, except the perpetual whacking, we eventually slumbered down again, awakening to sunlight and finally quiet surroundings. In the daylight, we observed that the hillside was quite steep, rocky, and slightly parabolic in shape, and the rock slide ended up in our south-adjacent campsite, leading us to conclude that 1. Inspection of the hillside would be dangerous and turn up little or nothing in the way of footprints. 2. Sounds could have originated from well up the hill and carried down the amphitheater sound. If it were people playing a prank, they must be extremely dedicated to risk their lives negotiating that hill in the dark and rain, and to wait in the woods any given night for the off-chance campers might come by in November. Though rock slides may naturally occur there on occasion, these certainly must not occur on the order of 3 a night, or someone would implement measures to ensure no one would camp in that location. Maybe that skunky smell we had encountered just previously was not a skunk at all. At any rate, we drove on the next morning to Willow Creek Ranger's office, making no mention of the events, to inquire as to open trails. We were instructed that much of the backcountry road system and corresponding trails was closed due to the Port Orford cedar root disease, but that we could drive into the Horse Lintel Creek area and hike along the closed roads. We took that advice and spent the next 5 nights uneventfully. We decided to return to Aikens Creek for the final night, which was Saturday, November 22nd, to take advantage of the open, flat space to dry wet equipment and see if we could observe anything further. We picked an open site midway between the foot of the hill and the highway, laid out equipment for drying, then decided to day hike somewhere nearby. We drove up Bluff Creek Road to its closure at the road junction to Fish Lake, and then hiked 1.6 miles down our road. I paid close attention to the steep clay roadsides, and once noticed what could have been a partial footprint of a large, human-like foot from the heel, about 4 inches in width, to a point about 6 inches forward, and perceivably midway along the length of the foot. I found, however, no other footprints or enough context to draw any real conclusion about the impression. That night, back at the campground, we kept a large campfire and kept some down and dead cedar nearby to throw in for quick brightness if needed. At one point, my dog suddenly barked and charged toward the trees at the edge of the campground, just below the freeway. I halted him and went to investigate, but found nothing unusual. Though better prepared, we neither saw nor heard anything further that night. We returned home, however, with a new awareness. Saw a form walking upright at a distance of 200 plus yards. We were a little excited, but more like scared shitless. There was enough light to just make out whatever it was. It was moving on 2 legs. We found where it had gouged out the soft earth on the stream it crossed. No discernible footprints, but whatever made the gouge was big. We had to wild-ass guess at the length. Over 19 inches. It was longer than the tip of my extended fingers to my elbow. The grass growing across the meadow didn't allow for footprints, but was pressed down several hours later. We didn't follow the trail towards the trees. It had been watching us for around 15 minutes, give or take 5. I was asleep when my friend woke me up. Said he heard something moving above us on the exposed rock above our camp. He had his 9mm personal protection from the typical axe murderer you meet while camping in hand, and was a little wound up. We listened to it move around with the occasional skip like somebody was jumping a short distance to another rock. It moved behind us, and then down into the meadow that surrounded the stream we were camping on. We saw it cross the stream and slip as it went across on the other side. It moved across the meadow at a quartering angle away from us and into the tree line. We know it wasn't a bear. We had several run-ins with bears trying to get our food cache at night in Yosemite. Thought we would get away from the crowds on his backpacking trip. Good call, huh? Once we calmed down, we discussed what we think we saw. We both came to the same conclusion. I know we did not hallucinate. Our eyes had time to adjust before we finally got a visual of it moving across the meadow. We stayed awake until we had enough light to look the area over quickly, then beat feet out of there. A friend and I went driving to camp in Oregon on Highway 199 in the fall of 1985. We didn't want to stay at a pay site, so we pulled off on a side spur road in dense forest and set up tent. We had our 2 Malamute Crest dogs with us, who had been by our sides in many backcountry adventures. As we set up our sleeping bags in the tent, the dogs began growling very menacingly with the hair up full on their backs. We thought there might have been a bear around and worried that they would take off after it and be difficult to catch. We left them outside anyway and crawled into our bags to sleep. Then the dogs began whimpering and trying to claw their way into the tent. We nervously let them in and not long afterwards began to hear howling. First, just one voice, but then followed by many voices. I would estimate that the sounds came from about 100 yards away. It was reminiscent of hearing a coyote pack or a wolf pack, but these were not canine voices. They ranged in pitch from childlike to adult male and higher female voices. It sounded like a really loud frat party in the middle of nowhere on a stormy, blustery night in the dark. It sounded like the people were talking very loud, but yet howling at the same time. I've had many experiences hearing coyote packs, and this was not what I heard. I have no further explanation. We braved through the night and got the heck out of there in the morning. The second experience I had at Avenue of the Giants was the same friend while we were hiking a trail there. It was again the fall of '85, about a month later than the first. We had a map with us and decided to cut a loop short by going cross-country through the dense redwood forest. Not long after we started, the dog we had with us, same as the one of the dogs previous, lunged out full on his leash and began dragging my friend up a steep incline. We reached the top and noticed large foot-shaped impressions, maybe 14 to 18 inches long and 8 to 10 inches wide, in the depth below. Above us on the length of ground, the dog dragged us through. Branches were snapped off clean up to 10 feet high on the trees. We made our way back to the main trail with no further incident. On July 5th, 2004, my brother and I went on a Sasquatch expedition to the Bluff Creek area of Humboldt County, California. The first night, we stayed at Onion Lake on Onion Mountain located on Forest Service Road 13, number 1. We spent all afternoon setting up camp, taking pictures and looking around Onion Lake for Sasquatch evidence. Around 9 p.m., just as it got dark, we heard a loud grunt roar down from a hilltop just above our camp. The grunt we heard can only be described as something exhaling a great amount of air all at once. The grunt was very loud, very rough, and only lasted for a second. My brother turned to me and said, "What the heck was that?" At that moment, a deer ran down the hill from the direction of the grunt and into our camp. Then, out of the darkness, another grunt roared to the forest from our right at a distance we thought was about 100 to 150 yards out from our camp. Then, we heard a grunt that straight out from our camp that was at least 500 yards out. Then we heard the grunt from up on top of the hill again. Then the grunt to our right answered the grunt on top of the hill. And then we heard the grunt that was out 400 or 500 yards answer the grunt on top of the hill and the grunt to our right. It was as if whatever it was making these sounds were communicating back and forth to one another. This grunting was very intense for the first hour or so, but then it calmed down a little throughout the rest of the night. The last grunt we heard was around 5 a.m., just before first light. At one time around 10 p.m., we heard a loud grunt come from behind us over by Onion Lake. It turned on my 3 million candle spotlight and searched the forest in the direction we heard the grunt, but of course saw nothing. That grunt could not have been no more than 100 yards away from us, and was very loud and rough. Around that same time, the other grunts seemed to be getting closer to our camp as well, and we were starting to get scared. We huddled together in the middle of our camp with our rifles and shotguns in hand, along with our 3 million candle spotlight in hand ready to take on whatever it was making these loud grunts. We were hearing something we had never heard before in the woods, and whatever it was, it sounded like it was very big. By the sound of the grunts these things were making, we were scared. If it was not for the firearms we took with us, we would have thrown all of our camping gear into our vehicle, and we would have left a dust cloud a half-mile high and 20 miles long as we were getting ready to get the heck out of there. We got up the next morning and looked around a little bit, but we didn't see or hear anything. Whatever it was making those grunts. They were nocturnal animals, and they were only active at night. We could also tell the animals were moving around in the forest from grunt to grunt. An example would be the grunts would get loud and would come from a specific location in the woods, and then the next grunt would come from the same general location, but a little to the right or left and a little closer or further away than the grunt before. We never did hear anything walking through the dry underbrush. Whatever they were making these grunts, they moved through the woods very quietly, with no sound at all, except for the grunts. We packed all of our camping equipment into our vehicle, and we spent the next night down at a different camp on Bluff Creek. That night, we had no visitors, and we returned home to Eureka the next morning. About 1 month after we returned from our expedition to Onion Lake and Bluff Creek, I was watching a show on the Discovery Channel about ball pythons in India. A large 15-foot snake was crawling on the ground in the jungle as a family of monkeys were going crazy at the sight of the snake. These monkeys looked a lot like chimpanzees, but they had black faces and black fur. At one moment, a large male monkey made a loud grunt as he threw a stick at the snake. The grunt was very loud, very rough, and only lasted for a second. I came flying off the couch and said to myself, myself, that's what we heard at Onion Lake. The grunt the monkey made at the snake on the Discovery Channel was the same tone, roughness, length, and sounded exactly like the grunt we heard the night of July 5th, 2004 at Onion Lake. The Sasquatch is thought to be a large primate of some kind, and my brother and I heard loud grunts coming out of the forest at Onion Lake. These grunts I later heard a monkey make on TV in India. The monkey's grunts were identical to the grunts we heard at Onion Lake. I'm not a scientist or expert on grunts, but I think this is very interesting. My brother and I were raised here in Humboldt County, and have lived here in the heart of Bigfoot country all of our lives. We've been interested in the Sasquatch Bigfoot for as long as we can remember, and we plan on making other Bigfoot expeditions in the future, because the sounds we heard coming out of the woods at Onion Lake on the night of July 5th, 2004, makes us wonder even more now about what's really out there. I found a 3-toed footprint and a 13.5-inch footprint sometime after 6 p.m. I have plaster casts and footage of the prints before I made casts out of them. I fell asleep about 9:30 p.m. While sleeping, I was woken up to noises outside of my tent. The first noise I heard was leaves being stepped on, but I told myself it's nothing a couple of times. I began to fall back asleep when I started to hear it again, but this time it was louder and heavier. The thing that started to get to me and concern me was the fact that I had started to feel the vibration in the ground every time that I took a step. I was facing stomach down when I woke up, so I just laid there listening, and all of a sudden, the noises stopped. Whatever was out there was breaking branches on the ground, and I also heard a couple of branches breaking on the trees. Then, the noises started again. By then I was starting to get scared because, for one thing, I couldn't see outside my tent, and the other thing was that I was alone. The noises stopped, and I made up my mind to go outside, so I started to unzip the inside of the tent, and as I did, I tripped trying to get outside. By then, I got up and turned on my flashlight, spun around, but seeing nothing and smelt nothing. Whatever was out there didn't make any more noise, but I knew whatever it was still there. I would estimate the noise were less than 30 feet away, probably closer. That's just how close it was. I then grabbed my tent, ran with it to my truck, threw it in the back, grabbed the rest of my stuff, and I was gone.